So very good morning, everybody. Today I'll be talking about the research theme which we have in our lab, and since it is mainly revolving around endothelial biology, I've titled my talk as "The Vascular Endothelium Still Amazing Us." So I have divided my talk into two parts. The first field, the vascular biology, which I'm pursuing for last 10 years. And in this, I'll be talking about the angiogenesis mechanisms, the vascular injury biomarkers, and how we are targeting the endothelial. Then about the liver endothelial cells, lymphatic endothelial cells, and endothelial progenitor cells. And the second part, I'll be talking about the area which I'm trying to develop for last 4 years based on the in vitro models to study the liver. So just a brief introduction. As we all know that angiogenesis is a growth of new vessels from already pre-existing mature endothelial cells, and it definitely differs from vasculogenesis, which is actually growth of new vessels from the progenitors. So angiogenesis can be accomplished by two discrete processes, which is one is sprouting, where you have an endothelial tip cell participating into growth of new vessels, and other is intussusceptive, where you have an outgrowth from the in the lumen, which is called as the intussusceptive microvascular growth. Now, whatever is the process, the trigger for angiogenesis is mainly hypoxia, and it involves tissue proteases and certain proangiogenic factors which are involved in the degradation of the basement membrane and the angiogenesis process. Now, besides the mature endothelial cells, there is a paradigm that endothelial progenitor cells which are coming from the marrow also participate in the repair of the vascular injury. So now, in the liver, when we talk about angiogenesis, it's actually a two-way process. During regeneration, the growing cluster of the hepatocytes become hypoxic, and that's the major trigger for angiogenesis in the liver during regeneration process. And when we talk of liver cirrhosis, so there's a parallel development of angiogenesis and fibrosis in the liver, and this has been seen both in the models as well as in the patients. So some researchers say that actually these more vessels in the liver are portal shunts in the liver, which are actually compensating for the increased portal hypertension in the liver. Now, the trigger for angiogenesis in the liver are the microvascular changes. So we know that we have a fenestrated endothelium, healthy endothelium in the liver, but in cirrhosis, in conditions of chronic injury, these fenestrae are lost. So you have a continuous endothelium which create a condition of hypoxia in the liver, and this changes the whole crosstalk physiology between the endothelial and the hepatic stellate cells. So you have angiogenesis coming up in the picture, where you have angiogenic factors like VEGF, PDGF, angiopoietins being secreted, and interestingly, the angiogenic response is also now mediated by the hepatic stellate cells and macrophages. So that's why fibrogenesis and angiogenesis are always found in parallel in cirrhosis conditions. Now, we had earlier shown that the bone marrow endothelial cells, they are involved in intrahepatic angiogenesis, and we have carried out a series of studies where we have illustrated how these cells interact with both the endothelial cells in the liver and the stellate cells participating in the process of liver fibrosis. Then after the initial studies, we have done or characterized these cells more comprehensively in the liver disease patients in alcoholic cirrhosis. Again, I'm not going to discuss the detailed data, but just that we have identified a specific CD45 high phenotype of endothelial progenitor cells in alcoholic cirrhosis patients which show enhanced angiogenic and inflammatory function. Now, the next question we asked was that what are the mechanisms which regulate angiogenesis in a NASH liver? So in this was an Indo-German study. We have taken 3 sets of study subjects, healthy, steatosis and steatohepatitis, which is steatosis plus inflammation. So based on the preliminary studies, we identified certain differentially expressed genes in the microarrays, and then a validation study, we carried out the PCR validations of these selected differentially expressed genes, and then we investigated what are the transcription factors which are regulating these differentially expressed genes. And out of all the transcription factors, we identified one transcription factor which was RUNX1, and then this RUNX1 was validated in patient studies, in the in vitro studies, and in the animal model studies. So in the patient studies, the first thing was to check where the RUNX1 is expressed or localized in the liver. So as you can see, the histology staining clearly showed that this RUNX1 was not present in the hepatocytes, but it was present in the sinusoids and mostly in the sinusoidal endothelial cells. This was also showing a correlation with the inflammatory grade and the NASH activity score of the patients. Then we went on to carry some in vitro studies where we made in vitro models of the NASH, where we treated primary hepatocytes with palmitic acid, and then we used conditioned media from these hepatocytes and then incubated the endothelial cells. And it was again seen that these endothelial cells, under the in vitro conditions, they express high amount of RUNX1. And when we silence this RUNX1 in the endothelial cells, we can see that markers like ICAM, VCAM, and CCL2, which are known to be adhesion and inflammatory genes, they are downregulated. And when we overexpress this RUNX1 in the in vitro conditions, these angiogenic attributes were increased. So this clearly showed that RUNX1 affects angiogenesis and adhesion markers in the endothelial cells. So under steatotic conditions, there is an upregulation of RUNX1 in the L6, and this is closely associated with inflammation in NASH. The next question we asked, whether RUNX1 causes inflammation, is it a causal factor? So for that we needed an animal model. So now the animal models for NASH, you can give a high-fat diet, or we have a methionine choline deficient diet. So in a high-fat diet model, it's usually a longer model of 16 weeks and we have less inflammation. But in a methionine choline deficient diet, the model is of 4 to 6 weeks, and it is dependent on a defective VLDL export from the liver. So we have a greater amount of fat in the liver and higher inflammation. So in this model, once we characterize the model, the first thing we saw was that there was an increased expression of the RUNX1 in the liver tissue, and specifically in the liver cells, this was present in the L6 but not in the hepatocytes. Then the next thing was to target this RUNX1 in the L6 specifically. So now, since we do not have a knockout mice, so what we delivered was a RUNX1 siRNA, which was specifically targeted to the liver endothelial cells. And this was synthesized by our collaborators from Naipur Guwahati. And once we had this molecule, siRNA molecule, so we planned the in vivo studies where we gave this RUNX1 siRNA and then characterized the model and in terms of its expression in the tissues as well as in the liver cells. So just briefly telling you the results, that the loss of RUNX1 in the L6 using this nano-engineered RUNX1 siRNA significantly inhibited again the adhesion molecules VCAM and ICAM as compared to the vehicles, and this also decreased the infiltration of monocytes in the NASH livers, reducing inflammation. So this was a study where we showed that we can specifically target L6, we can specifically inhibit RUNX1 in the L6, which reduces the adhesion molecules and immune cell infiltration in the liver. Now, endothelium is not only a target in cirrhosis, it's also an important target in sepsis. So an ongoing endothelial injury in cirrhosis, in fact, predisposes patients to sepsis. And you know why this happens? Because there's a protective endothelial layer which is called as glycocalyx. And this glycocalyx actually is a target for all the LPS and bacterial endotoxin. And once we have a disrupted glycocalyx, there's an exposure of these adhesion molecules, which is ICAM and VCAM, which further triggers inflammation or adhesion of leukocytes and platelets. Now, the soluble markers of these neutrophil activation or adhesion, they have been very well correlated with organ failure and poor clinical outcome in sepsis patients. But this was not known in cirrhosis. So this was a study which we carried out in patients, cirrhotic patients, either with COVID or bacterial sepsis. So we actually hypothesized that an increased mortality, what we are seeing in patients with cirrhotic patients with COVID, might be due to an ongoing endothelial injury. So these markers were higher in the COVID plus cirrhotic patients as compared to the severe COVID patients alone. So we have higher levels of ICAM and lower levels of VEGF-R1 and angiopoietin-1. And then we wanted to know if this kind of injury also exists in cirrhotic plus sepsis patients. So interestingly, between the cirrhotic patients with COVID and with sepsis, we did not find any major difference. So that means these markers are almost like common across these two study cohorts. So we also correlated this marker with mortality in these patients, and we found out that one of the soluble marker, which is soluble ICAM1, this performs about 14% better than MELD in predicting mortality in these set of patients with either COVID or bacterial sepsis. So next, we asked whether these markers can also identify culture positive and negative patients, and almost all the markers what we studied, they were not significantly different. So we thought that probably these markers, using these markers, we will be able to screen the patients for further analysis, especially the culture negative patients. So in this project, what we are carrying out with the IIT Delhi, Dr. Neetu Singh. So we are giving them screen plasma patient for these markers, which are culture negative. And then we are enriching these patient samples with bacterial product antibodies, either LPS or lipotoic acid. And this enriched sample will then be passed through a microsphere, which is encapsulated with carbon dots. And this carbon dots will then be, since the carbon dots are now growing near the vicinity of the bacteria, even though the bacteria concentration is less, they will be showing a deflection in a some pH-based device. So this device we are currently developing, and we have now proposed a greater number of patients in this study. So then another function of the liver endothelial cells beside angiogenesis is angiocrine functions. So this angiocrine function is nothing but an instructive signal which is given by the endothelial cells to the neighboring non-vascular cells, either to divide or to undergo fibrosis. So this is the signal in liver endothelial cells. They provide paracrine factors like hepatocyte growth factors or angiopoietins or VEGF, which allows the hepatocytes to proliferate. So this is under homeostasis, but when the liver is fibrotic, you have another kind of angiocrine factors coming into the picture. So with this kind of rationale, we hypothesized that since bile acids and LSECs both are involved in liver regeneration, how do LSECs interact with bile acids? So actually LSECs are the first cells which come into contact with bile acids, but there are no studies which have investigated this kind of interactions. So our hypothesis here is that bile acids affect the angiocrine functions, which further modulate hepatic regeneration. And I'm not going to talk much about the data. This is work which is done by Impreet, and she'll be presenting this today at the ASLD meeting. Now, this was all about the intrahepatic angiogenesis. Now, just taking you to the nearby organ, which is gut. So we know that besides the intrahepatic resistance contributing to portal hypertension, we have a splanchnic component where splanchnic vasodilation and mesenteric angiogenesis leads to an increased hyperperfusion of the splanchnic vessels and increased portal blood flow, causing portal hypertension. And this is very well shown in the models and the patients, that there is increased microvascular density and increased microvascular permeability in the mesenteric vessels. Now, just neighboring to the splanchnic circulation is the splanchnic lymphatic circulation. So what are lymph vessels? In terms of gut, we have lacteals, which are blind-ended capillaries in the small intestine, and these lacteals, they drain into the submucosal lymphatic vascular network in the collecting lymphatic vessels. So these are all lined by lymphatic endothelial cells, which have specific markers like podoplanin, LYVE1, VEGFR3. So in the mesenteric collecting vessels, we have LYCs, which are also having smooth muscle cells, which are required for the propulsion of the lymph. Now these, all these lymphatic channels, they actually drain into mesenteric lymph node, then the thoracic duct, and then back to the circulation. So these vessels are critical for fat absorption and fluid homeostasis. So it is known that in cirrhosis, there's a 30-fold increase in the lymph, and an impaired lymphatic drainage in cirrhosis, which causes ascites. So we have a project which is a student working is Pinky, and we have hypothesized that if we are able to increase the growth of these intestinal vessels by using pro-lymphoangiogenic factor, which is VGFC, we would probably reduce some ascites and ongoing inflammation. But the problem with VGFC is that it has a short half-life, circulatory half-life. So we have two objectives here in the project. Firstly, to develop a targeted molecule of VGFC and also to explore its efficacy. So again, we have done some preliminary studies. We have this formulation in hand, targeted VGFC from Naipur Guwahati, and then we have planned some in vivo studies. So the studies showed that the lymphatic vessels, they are increased, which are VGFR3 positive in the treated animals, and they are also functionally improving. There is an improved lymphatic drainage, there is a reduced leakage, which is extracellular fluorescence of body P, and then lymphangiogenesis, or the number of vessels, is also increasing. So from the micro CT scans, we have also shown that there's a reduced ascites or fluid formation in the abdominal cavity in the treated animals. So now to see the clinical relevance of these vessels, so in the patients, so we have got some duodenal biopsies from compensated and decompensated patients, and as you can see in decompensated, it is clearly increased and more dilated. So we have used a marker which is podoplanin here. And we have also observed that these podoplanin score, which is the dilated lymphatic vessels, is increased in patients with ascites and bleeding. So now a very small cohort, we have seen how this predicts mortality in patients. So among all the factors what we have analyzed in the univariate multivariate analysis, so at a cutoff value of 6.5.
Sorry to interrupt you, Savneet. What does your lab do? It's not the excellent data. What does the lab do?
So
it's an animal physiologist. So I would like you to just connect with the clinicians. What can they do in your lab? Not what you do in your lab.
Okay.
What can they do in your lab?
So I thought I'll just give some brief what we are doing, and then something related to this.
Yeah.
We have these research questions in mind where probably the clinicians can pitch in.
Yeah.
Like I said, that the lymphatics, they are definitely a predictor of mortality, and it has seen that in ICU patients, the thoracic duct lymph, it contains higher levels of the inflammatory factors. So like the questions which we are having in mind is, can the thoracic duct lymph profiling inform us more about systemic inflammation and mortality? And then how effective is albumin infusion in cirrhotic patients which are already having dysfunctional lymphatics? Because this is where the albumin goes back to the circulation. Most of the albumin is actually distributed in the extravascular space. But when the lymph duct is having an impaired drainage, so probably albumin infusion might not be effective in such kind of patients. Then what about combining pro-lymphoangiogenic and anti-angiogenic therapies in cirrhotic patients? So these are some of the questions which we can deal. So the next part, what is...
to summarize now.
Yeah. So the next part, what we are doing is, we are carrying out...
Let me go back to the previous work, because since I am fully aware, the new thought says that every drug goes to the liver. Can you bypass liver and still deliver drugs without blood through lymphatics? So the previous experiments only showed can be delivered by nanotechnology using VEGFC, which will take the drugs into lymphatics without having going. So that is one area, so you can have drug delivery to the body without in a cirrhotic liver. And second is the albumin and the lymphatic, and she has experimentally demonstrated how lymphatic systems can be seen by and the reduction in ascites. Please go ahead. You have another 1 or 2 minutes.
Yes. So the next part, what we are dealing is to develop in vitro models to study the liver. So the three major aspects here we are focusing are the cells, these biomaterials, and the techniques like bioprinting and electrospinning. So the lab has all kinds of primary liver cells which are well characterized, whether it is hepatocytes, LSECs or HSCs. And although we do not have any approved costs here, but the market cost of one hepatocyte vial, which is currently available, is around 25,000 rupees. So besides the 2D primary cultures, we also have now optimized the three-dimensional cultures of liver spheroids. These are also well characterized, and also liver organoids, along with the with our collaborator, Professor Pedro. And then, in terms of scaffolds, what we are doing is, the cells also need some certain matrix cues. So for this, we have electrospun nanopolymers, and this is the initial study what Ashwini is doing. So she has well characterized this technique in IIT Delhi, and she is spinning this using these scaffolds with the PLA and decellularized liver matrix. And she has shown that the cells are very happily growing, and they are also functionally active on this kind of scaffold. So in terms of process, besides electrospinning, we have also shown that bioprinting can be now used to formulate some of these novel liver scaffolds, and this is one study which we have published with IIT Delhi. So this is just a proposed protocol which I think we should be following here. Probably the patient, we don't understand the patients as you people do. So something which the observation what you do in the patient should come in the form of a research question to us as well, because it is actually these questions which then lead to mechanistic study. So once we have questions like why and what, we can help to design you a study how. So what we can do is that we have all these primary liver cells and tissues in terms of 2D and 3D. We have platforms where we can do all the mechanistic studies. We have animal models. We have targeted therapies. We have assays for drug toxicity and efficacy. So it is here with which we as a lab can pitch in with all our expertise. But the problem here is, this is the bottleneck. So we do not go from here to here. So if we have to focus on how to improve ourselves, so this is here where most of the projects die before going into the society or before going for the patient welfare. And this is here I end. I thank all my team, my collaborators in Albius and outside Albius. Thank you so much.